Yo, what up? It's Donut, and I'm here with the one-on-one podcast, the homuncologist himself, Purple Lights, Music, and Alchemy.
Yeah, I think alchemy is at the core of quite literally our existence. I believe they're still practicing alchemy today, even the people that run our country.
So the most simplest way to put what alchemy is changing lead into gold.
No, so that is a byproduct, okay? So the secret of alchemy is to quite literally manipulate reality. When you complete the magnum opus, which is the great work, whatever that is, right? We don't know because that's how enigmatic it is. Everything is written in code, everything is really cryptic. When you do the great work of turning lead into gold, which can be symbolic as well, the light that is supposed to be emitted, this is why I say light is very important, because the light that is emitted from that reaction quite literally changes your DNA. It becomes infused in your DNA and it changes your genetic makeup in order to where you're able to step outside of reality and you're able to manipulate reality real time. So if you think about the book of Enoch and how he was able to, after being shown all the secrets, being shown everything, he was able to become Metatron. You know, on Baphomet, right? Not to get too satanic, but on Baphomet's forearms, it's coagulate and dissolve. Well, I think that's what's going on, where they're able to dissolve out of this reality and coagulate somewhere else. And I think that's part of the alchemical process. You become an androgynous light being. By manipulating matter, not only is it sensory, but it's also intellectual. So there's different things at play. I'll use an example with Jay Weidner, because he's a director. The lights, camera, action, you know, like this whole cinemagician, Hollywood act type of thing. Well, he told me, because he's an alchemist, he told me that he has a room that it's specifically for being in the dark. The way that they would meditate back then, if you look at secret societies, Masonic orders, etc., they would use caves for their ceremonies. Well, it's got to do with the production of DMT. It's got to do with wanting to induce a near-death experience, because when you're able to do that, you're able to unlock certain things within your own self, within your own psyche, that I believe you're able to use in this reality, right? You have people who, they say they've seen their whole life flash before their eyes. Well, what if you're able to do all that in a controlled environment, where you go into this cave for 3 days, you know, the chemical that induces sleep? Well, when you're in darkness for a long time in a cave, and this is why monks back then would meditate in caves for a long time, it would be the super melatonin, where they're in this deep sleep. Now, when you wake up and you see light for the first time, it floods your brain with another chemical. And when they both mix together, you get like this crazy psychedelic hallucination. A dark cave. He has a room specifically almost like a sarcophagus, a coffin that he goes into. If you really think about the idea of the vampire, right? Dracula, where they sleep in this coffin. Well, what if that was part again of a magical order of some sorts? We always have the battle between werewolves and vampires. It's alchemical allegory. It's alchemical symbolism is what I'm getting at. So by them personifying it, by making it into a story that people resonate with, well, I took it a step further. I said, okay, so you're telling me about being in the dark. They're talking about extended periods of times, days at a time, 3 days at a time. He says, I have a room where I go in for 3 days and I don't come out, whatever. We're talking about darkness and about the flooding of light. Well, if you think about what cinemas are, what movie theaters are, it's a simulacra of a cave. And then what do they do in there? Well, they flood us with all these lights of all these movies, all these sigils all at the same time. And I said to him, I said, Jay, is that some sort of magic that's happening? Is that some sort of alchemy that's happening? He said this, and again, you can listen to the episode. He said, I can tell you as a director, that is a very effective technique.
Well, also with musicians, let's say before the theater, right? You got the theater where they would go and watch a play. With the cave and the cinemagicians, I think you're onto something so big, so huge, and I think this is a perfect segue to get into some interesting finds. We're talking about music, and there's this thing called the Barbershop Quartet. The red and white is interesting because it's the Knights Templar color too, red, white, and black. But getting into plays, music, frequencies, and alchemy, barber pole has got that red and white, right? What's a barber shop? Has the checkerboard floors in all of them, right? They got this symbol. People would go to the barber shop. This is where you get all your information. And this is where surgery happened at. Surgery also happened at the barber shop. And then you got famous plays like Sweeney Todd. And if you notice Sweeney Todd, the color scheme of the cover, they're very intentional, the red and white and black. Because Sweeney Todd took place on Fleet Street. That was a huge Knights Templar street, as that's where the Temple Church was, the banking system of the Templars.
What if those were sacrifices for that, dude?
See, that is deep right there. So that's where I was going with that Memphis Moon rituals, how these artists are dying. But this color scheme, if you go back to the play, they use the red, white, and black, the Knights Templar colors, the barbershop colors. It's about a barbershop dude. And none of his musicals had this tone and this like color scheme for this was very intentional of Sweeney Todd. Bach, who plays a huge role in alchemy of music, the pinnacle of music, and he went to a surgeon and they made him blind. They botched his eye. And this happened with Handel as well. But the interesting thing is it's by the same guy, this guy, John Taylor.
These lines that are around the world, ley lines, I believe these parallels. I know we covered John Dee and the Black Rock at the North Pole. Well, he was in touch with Mercator, which is a very influential cartographer. Well, what if the intentional planning of these latitude and longitude lines around the world serve as some sort of magical grid that's wrapped around the world in a sympathetic, magical way? You're able to tap into, like how I talked about the mind palaces, where if you have a map of a place, you're able to tap into people's ideas and energies through the use of the simulacra of the real thing. So in mind palaces, if you construct a model of it, you're able to manipulate that model and also tap into the energies of the people in the real building that it's modeled after. Okay, so the idea that our entire latitude and longitude system, a famous occultist, John Dee, contributed a lot of the ideas to that system being made. What if they conspired together to do this in some sort of occult way? Along these lines, if they spill blood and they charge this line, because again, it's a sort of talisman or a sigil of sorts, they're able to tap into that energy. And a lot of the states along the 33rd parallel are death row states, hinting at the fact that they're sacrificing people to these lines. This taps into and plays in perfectly to the idea that we left off in that North Pole episode. For those that haven't checked it out, episode 125 of the 101 podcast, which we broke some ground on that episode and people really loved it. But the idea that there is this hidden God that is only revealed through magnetism. Well, isn't the world magnetic, right? We have the North Pole and all these different things. Well, what if they're charging and feeding this egregore or this entity along these lines? Because that's also, it plays into the 12 vial vortices, which are 12 anomalies around the globe. You have the Bermuda Triangle, you have Mohenjo-Daro, you have the South Atlantic Anomaly, you have the Devil's Triangle near Japan. You have all these different areas around the world that the veil is thinner. That Sweeney Todd, because I've actually seen Sweeney Todd in person. Now, you mentioned that it is along that Fleet Street, which is a Masonic city. Well, what if the reason that those murders happened there was in order to charge that particular place, right along that line, along that parallel, whatever it may be, the occultists of that age? Now, you brought up the idea that they were botching these surgeries. Well, what if it was intentional, Donut? Because I've covered the Copial cipher, which is a cipher that wasn't discovered, and it's the Oculus Order, which was a secret society of eye surgeons, quote unquote, of oculists. I had a eye surgeon on for that episode. The same tissue that's found in your eye is found on your pineal gland, and they would do these weird rituals where they would do a fake surgery on somebody. But hear me out, dude. What if they use those eyes? Because there is such thing as symbolic mutilation. What if they gave up those eyes as some sort of offering that would later on be used as a talisman for magical purposes? Again, we go back to the Faustian Pact. What are you willing to give up, Donut, in order for the fame, in order for everything else? And we're not talking about guys that were nobodies. We're talking about guys that were very influential in society, that were playing a game that goes much deeper than we're led on to believe.
The purple lights, right? You, in the beginning of this, you were talking about how it emanates a light. And I want to get a little bit into the purple lights is they're popping up all over the place. The purple light, the World Economic Forum promoting LED purple lights, and they're coming up on Davos, which is in a couple of days. This week is going to be nuts. I think next week there's going to be an event. I'm not saying it'll be a terrible event, but I think it will shock the markets or something. We got a full moon coming up on the 6th, right? January 6th. There was that whole January 6th Capitol thing. And then we got Friday the 13th coming up. And then we got Davos on the 16th. And the World Economic Forum has this whole thing on purple lights and LED farming. Now, the interesting thing about lights and why purple lights grow plants, it's the same reason how a remote control controls a television. So the infrared light of your clicker, your remote control, controls the television. That's the exact same thing that's going on with purple lights to the plants. Are they going to try to control people with these lights? If this grows plants, what if there's some sort of cataclysmic event with the sun or something like that where we need to grow food quickly or something like that, where they got all these purple lights? Maybe that's just one hypothesis. There's a million different possibilities that could happen. But, out of all the million, my mind will go to the worst thing that can happen.
But also, I came across January 6th in Jay Weidner's book that I was reading about alchemy. It's called The Mysteries of the Great Cross of Hendaye. And it is a book about Fulcanelli and how the cross at Hendaye was visited by Hitler, by the way. He visited this area. And allegedly, the end of the world as we know it, the apocalypse or whatever it is inscribed alchemically in symbolism on this cross. And Jay Weidner and Vincent Bridges is one of my favorite esoteric and occult authors. Unfortunately, he did pass away. So I was able to interview Jay on this book, and we talked about everything about alchemy, and it's really crazy. The January 6th comes up in this book, which I said, this is really crazy. How do we unravel Fulcanelli's first conundrum? We start by looking at the significance of the one solid date given us, January 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany. To the early church, the Feast of the Epiphany, which marked the arrival of the Magi, the marriage of at Cana, and the baptism of Jesus by John, was much more important than Jesus' nativity. For some sections of the Christian community, such as the Cathars, the Epiphany was the most significant moment in the church calendar. Some obscure secret seemed to hide behind the juxtaposition of these three events, a secret that threatened to change the very concept of Christianity as taught by the official church. So there is something about this date.
And it's connected to the Magi, which is
Yes.
also connected to MAGA, right? Magi, Magus.
Yes. The Feast of the Epiphany. It's not by a mistake that they chose this exact date to do this insurrection, right? This whole thing. Oh my goodness, this is crazy. So, dude, I think that it's a ritual, bro. It's a ritual that they're doing, and it's all linked to, again, these are lost secrets. Probably never know about. We're talking about the Cathars. Well, guess what happened to the Cathars? Well, the Cathars were all killed. Why? Because they were going against the mainstream narrative, the mainstream media of the time. They were Gnostics, right? They believed that we were all, back to light beings. And I want to talk about the light because in my city, they said that the lights being purple in Orlando was a manufacturer's defect. And there's an article that I think I sent you where they said, oh no, nobody worry. The Chinese manufacturer is going to change all these. They were all purple. The crazy thing about purple is that I've linked it again back to alchemy because I've been on this alchemy kick for a little bit because I think it's very important. But the idea that there are different spectrums of light that we're able to see. Everything we know about the observer effect and the double slit experiment, how matter reacts differently when it's being observed. Well, Hans Purple, and I've seen the terracotta soldiers up close at a museum. I believe it was a Smithsonian museum in Chicago. I could be wrong. Han Purple is again, we're talking about alchemists. They were alchemists at the time. It is a color, dude, that is over 2,000 years old that has not been able to be replicated. Now, check this out. The weird thing about Han Purple is that it escapes a dimension when it reaches a certain temperature. And you heard that right. Interdimensional pigment. So hear me out. If you go and pull up a picture of the terracotta warriors or soldiers, there is said to be a lake of mercury underneath that compound. Mercury is tied to alchemy. Now, every single terracotta soldier is different. They all have distinct features. They're all different. Now, hear me out. The architect as magician. So this here was the microcosm of that particular emperor, which he also has a very interesting history as well. I believe it was Emperor Qi or Chi, I forget his name, but this guy was building a microcosm of the macro palace that he wanted in this afterlife. Now, there was a belief back then that whenever the emperor or the king would die, so Qin Shi Huang, right? The depicted the army, King Shi Huang. So these guys were all alchemists, and it goes back to the homunculus, bro, and eternal alchemy, which is Chinese alchemy. And the idea that he wanted to create this reflection of, his divine palace. Now, now hear me out, because we're talking about the transmutation of consciousness through the use of light. Well, through the use of the color purple in this particular instance. What if everyone who died, or what if they were killed off in order to infuse their consciousness into these soldiers that they themselves carved out? Because there was the belief back then that if the emperor died, his entire staff needed to die as well and needed to be buried with him. So to extrapolate that, what if they mixed their blood or their semen or something as an offering, as a sort of talisman in the paint, in this pigment that escapes this reality? And what if they had access to some sort of technology where they were able to infuse their consciousness or their soul into these soldiers, into these statues in some sort of way? Again, that's a theory that I've been kicking around because it's been proven that they haven't been able to replicate the pigment and it escapes this reality, bro. Think about that for a second, Donut. It escapes this a color. When it's observed, it reaches a certain type of temperature and it goes from 3D to 2D. How bananas is that, dude? This color escapes a dimension, don't it? The Hans purple, yes. Who also painted themselves blue. The Mayans painted themselves blue. Right? We have this idea of that what happened to the Mayans? Well, they all disappeared. Well, no. What if they used this technology that they were able to resonate at a certain frequency in order to escape this dimension through the tapping of the ley lines, through the tapping of this energetic field that we were talking about at the beginning?
Very interesting. Yeah, because I know like all the cinemagicians be ripping off these alchemists.
Well, if you think of Agent Smith.
Okay.
Think about it. Agent Smith.
Of the Matrix.
Yeah, so like Blacksmith, right? So
okay.
Agent
Will Smith.
Yeah, exactly.
Will Smith was supposed to be the star of the Matrix.
Oh, there you go. Well, so Agent Smith, that's what they're hinting at, like this Vulcan god, this god of the furnace, which is also is linked to alchemy, the forger, the blacksmith, the god of the forge, whatever it is, etc., etc.